Tonight we embark on a gentle exploration of one of the most transformative teachings the Buddha ever shared. Through ancient wisdom and timeless stories, we will discover together how old wounds can heal, how pain can transform, and how the heart can soften even after the deepest hurts. These are not lessons that require effort or struggle. They are teachings that will naturally settle into your awareness, offering you the peace that comes from true healing. Before we begin, feel welcome to share what time it is where you are and where you are listening from tonight. If you are carrying pain from the past, know that your heart is not broken beyond repair. If you feel that old wounds still control your life, understand that healing is always possible. The Buddha saw that we all carry injuries from our journey through life. He taught that these wounds are not permanent marks against us. They are temporary conditions that can heal when met with wisdom and compassion. Tonight we will explore the nature of old wounds, the hurts that happened years ago but still feel fresh, the betrayals that changed how we see the world, the losses that carved empty spaces in our hearts, the traumas that taught us to protect ourselves by closing off. Not all pain is the same. Some wounds are like scratches that heal quickly and leave no trace, but old wounds are different. They are the injuries that went deep, that happened when we were vulnerable, that came from people or circumstances we trusted. These are the wounds that the Buddha understood require patient, gentle attention. As we move through these teachings and stories tonight, you may notice your breathing becoming slower and deeper. Your body may naturally begin to release tension you did not know you were holding. Understanding itself brings healing. There is nothing you need to accomplish right now, nothing you need to fix before morning. Just rest here as we explore together how old wounds heal and what the Buddha taught about transformation and recovery. The Buddha once sat with a student who had been deeply hurt by someone she loved. This student, whose name was Kisa, came to him in despair. She told him that the betrayal she had experienced had shattered something inside her that could never be repaired. She said she felt like a clay pot that had been dropped and broken into so many pieces that no one could ever put it back together. The Buddha listened with complete attention. When Kisa finished speaking, he did not tell her that her pain was not real or that she should simply let it go. Instead, he asked her a question. When a bone breaks, what must happen for it to heal? Kisa thought about this. The bone must be set properly. It must be kept still and protected. It must be given time. The Buddha nodded. And during the healing, is the bone weak or strong? It is weak, Kisa said. It cannot bear weight. It must be treated carefully. Exactly, the Buddha said. And if someone were to strike the bone again, while it was healing, what would happen? The injury would become worse, Kisa answered. The healing would be interrupted. It might never heal properly. The Buddha looked at her with gentle eyes. Your heart is like this bone. It has been broken. It is in the process of healing. But you keep striking it again with harsh thoughts. You keep telling yourself that you're permanently damaged, that you will never recover, that something essential in you has been destroyed forever. Each time you think these thoughts, you interrupt the natural healing process. Kisa felt tears come to her eyes. But how do I stop? The thoughts come automatically. I cannot control them. You cannot control whether the thoughts arise, the Buddha said. But you can choose whether to believe them. You can choose whether to add force to them. When a thought says you are broken beyond repair, you can notice that this is just a thought, not a truth. You can choose to treat your healing heart with the same care you would treat a broken bone, protecting it, giving it time, not demanding that it bear full weight before it is ready. This teaching contains something essential about healing old wounds. The Buddha understood that healing is a natural process. Just as the body knows how to mend broken bones and close cuts, the heart and mind know how to heal from emotional and psychological wounds. But this natural healing can be interrupted. It can be prevented. And one of the main ways we prevent our own healing is by believing that we are damaged beyond repair, that the wound defines us permanently, that we will never be whole again. Tonight, we will explore what supports healing and what interrupts it. We will look at how wounds form, how they persist, and most importantly, how they can finally close and leave us stronger than before. Not unchanged, but not destroyed either. Different? Yes, but still whole, still capable of love, trust, joy, and peace. Let us begin with understanding the nature of wounds themselves. In a village surrounded by rice fields, there lived a farmer named Daichi, whose life had been peaceful and simple until one terrible season. That year, a flood came that destroyed not only his crops, but also his home. In the chaos of the rising water, Daichi's young son, who was helping to save their belongings, was swept away by the current. Though many villagers searched for days, the boy was never found. The grief that filled Daichi was unlike anything he had known. It was not just sadness, it was a tearing sensation, as if something vital had been ripped from his chest. He could not eat, he could not sleep. He moved through his days like a ghost, barely aware of the world around him. The other villagers tried to help. They brought food, they offered words of comfort, they told him that time would heal his pain. But Daichi could not imagine ever feeling anything but this crushing weight of loss. Months passed. Daichi rebuilt his home. He replanted his fields. But inside, nothing changed. The wound of losing his son remained as fresh as the day it happened. He would wake in the night reaching for the boy, forgetting for a moment that he was gone, and then the realization would crash over him again like a new wave of grief. One day, an old wandering monk came through the village. This monk, whose name was Ryota, had a quiet presence that drew people to him. When he met Daichi, he could see immediately the nature of the man's suffering. That evening, Ryota asked if he could stay in Daichi's home, and Daichi, following the custom of hospitality, agreed. As they sat together that night, Ryota did not ask about Daichi's loss. He did not offer comfort or advice. He simply sat in stillness, and somehow his presence made it possible for Daichi to speak. The words came slowly at first, then in a flood. Daichi told him everything. The day of the flood, the moment he realized his son was gone, the endless searching, the unbearable emptiness that followed. When Daichi finally fell silent, exhausted from speaking, Ryota was quiet for a long time. Then he said something unexpected. "Your wound is still open." Daichi looked at him confused. "Of course it is open. My son is gone. How could such a wound ever close?" Ryota nodded. "It is true that this loss is permanent. Your son will not return. That fact cannot change. But the wound itself, the way the loss sits in your heart and mind, that can change. Right now, the wound is open because you are keeping it open." Daichi felt anger rise in him. "How am I keeping it open? I did not choose this pain." "No," Ryota said gently. "You did not choose the loss, but you are choosing, perhaps without realizing it, to revisit the wound constantly, to touch it, to examine it, to make sure it is still there. You are afraid that if the wound heals, if the pain lessens, it will mean you have forgotten your son, that you did not love him enough. So, you keep the wound fresh by returning to it again and again." The words struck Daichi like a physical blow. He started to protest, but then stopped. He realized that Ryota was right. Every day, multiple times a day, Daichi would deliberately return his mind to the moment of loss. He would replay the flood. He would imagine his son's final moments. He would walk through the details of the searching and the terrible realization that the boy was gone. He told himself this was honoring his son's memory, but really it was refusing to let the wound close even a little. "But if I let it heal," Daichi said, his voice breaking, "what will I have left of him?" Ryota leaned forward. "You will have your love for him. You will have your memories of the time you had together. you will have the ways he changed you and shaped you as a father. All of that will remain. What will change is that these things will no longer cause you constant agony. The love will remain, but the torture will ease. He paused, letting this sink in. A wound that heals does not mean the injury never happened. A scar is evidence that something hurt you and that your body worked to repair itself. Your heart can develop a scar too. The loss will always be part of your story, but it does not have to be an open wound that bleeds every day for the rest of your life. Over the days that followed, Ryota taught Daichi a practice. Whenever Daichi noticed himself deliberately returning his mind to the moment of loss, replaying the trauma, examining the wound, he would gently redirect his attention, not by forcing the thoughts away, but by choosing to remember his son differently. Instead of focusing on the loss, he would recall a moment of joy they had shared. Instead of imagining the boy's death, he would remember his laugh, his curiosity, the way he would run through the rice fields. At first, this practice felt impossible. The pull to return to the wound was so strong. It felt wrong to think of happy memories when his son was gone. But Daichi persisted, and gradually, something began to shift. The memories of joy did not erase the loss, but they created space around it. The wound was still there, but it was not the only thing there. Months later, Daichi realized one morning that he had slept through the night without waking in anguish. The loss of his son was still with him. It always would be. But the wound had finally begun to close. The constant bleeding had stopped. He could think of his son now with a bittersweet mixture of love and sadness rather than pure agony. The scar would always be there, but it no longer disabled him. When Ryota returned to the village a year later, he found Daichi working in his fields, teaching a group of village children about rice farming. Daichi's face still held sadness, but it also held something new. Peace. The wound had healed enough that he could engage with life again. He could give to others. He could experience moments of contentment alongside the permanent knowledge of his loss. Take a slow breath here and notice what this story brings up for you. Daichi's journey shows us something essential about old wounds. They do not heal because we pretend the injury never happened. They heal when we stop actively keeping them open, when we stop returning again and again to examine them, to make sure they still hurt, to prove to ourselves that they were real and serious. The Buddha taught that pain is inevitable. Life brings loss, betrayal, trauma, and hurt. These things will happen. But suffering, the ongoing agony that persists long after the initial injury, that is often something we add through how we relate to our pain. Daichi could not bring his son back. That was beyond his control. But he could choose whether to spend every day for the rest of his life replaying the worst moment, or whether to let his heart begin its natural healing process. This does not mean we forget. It does not mean the people we lost or the hurts we experienced do not matter. It means we allow the acute phase of the wound to close so that we can carry the memory without carrying constant torture. Many of us have wounds like this. Injuries from our past that we keep open by constantly revisiting them. We tell ourselves we are processing or honoring what happened, but really, we are preventing healing. We touch the wound over and over, making sure it still hurts, and then we wonder why it never gets better. The Buddha's wisdom invites us to notice this pattern with compassion for ourselves. We are not doing this to hurt ourselves deliberately. We are often doing it because we are afraid. Afraid that healing means forgetting. Afraid that moving forward means what happened did not matter. Afraid that if we stop suffering, we are somehow betraying the significance of the injury. But healing is not betrayal. Healing is the natural movement of life toward wholeness. When we allow it, we honor both what happened and our own capacity to recover. Let us explore another story that shows how wounds persist and what creates the conditions for healing. In a mountain town known for its craftspeople, there lived a young woman named Yuki who was training to become a potter. She had studied for 3 years under a master potter named Hana, and she had developed real skill. Her hands knew how to center clay on the wheel. Her eye could judge thickness and proportion. She was on her way to becoming accomplished in her craft. But Yuki had a secret wound that affected everything she created. When she was a child, barely 7 years old, her father had looked at a drawing she made and laughed. It was not cruel laughter, just thoughtless amusement at the childish proportions and strange colors. But to young Yuki, that laugh had felt like being struck. It carried a message that her creative work was ridiculous, that she should be ashamed of what she made, that exposing her artistic efforts would lead to mockery. The wound from that moment never healed properly. Years later, even as an adult learning pottery, Yuki could not shake the feeling that her work was foolish and that people were secretly laughing at her efforts. Every pot she made seemed inadequate. Every bowl held the shame of that long ago moment. She could not see her own skill because the old wound colored her vision. Hana, her teacher, noticed that Yuki would finish a piece and immediately point out everything wrong with it. She would apologize for her work before anyone else could see it. She would sometimes destroy pieces that were actually quite good, claiming they were failures. Hana saw that Yuki was talented, but that something was blocking her from recognizing her own ability. One afternoon, after Yuki had smashed a perfectly good vase in frustration, Hana asked her to sit down and talk. "Yuki, what do you see when you look at your work?" Yuki hesitated. "I see all the flaws. The uneven thickness here, the wobble in the rim, the glaze that did not coat smoothly enough." Hana nodded. "And what do you feel when you look at your work?" "Shame," Yuki said quietly. "I feel ashamed that I cannot do better, that my work is not good enough, that people will see it and think I am foolish for trying." "Where does that shame come from?" Hana asked gently. "Has anyone here mocked your work?" Yuki thought about this. No, the other students and teachers had always been encouraging. Even her teacher Hana praised her progress regularly. The shame was not coming from anything happening now. It was coming from somewhere in her past. As she sat with the question, the memory of her father's laugh surfaced. She had not thought about that moment in years, but suddenly she could see how it had been influencing her all this time. She told Hana about the childhood memory, about the laugh and the feeling of being foolish, about how that moment had created a wound that never closed. Hana listened carefully, and when Yuki finished, the older woman was thoughtful for a long moment. That laugh happened. "How many years ago?" Hana asked. 15 years, Yuki said, "and you have been carrying it every day since then, bringing it with you to the pottery wheel, letting it judge every piece you make, letting it speak to you in your father's voice, telling you that your work is ridiculous." Yuki felt tears come. "Yes, that is exactly what has been happening." Hana stood and went to a shelf where she kept some of her own early work. She brought down a small misshapen bowl and placed it in front of Yuki. "Look at this. I made this when I was learning, about your age. It is terrible. The walls are uneven. The base is too thick. The shape is awkward." Yuki looked at the bowl. It was indeed quite flawed. "When I made this," Hana continued, "my teacher looked at it and shook his head. He said it looked like a drunk person had made it while blindfolded. He laughed. The other students laughed. I was humiliated." Yuki looked up at her teacher in surprise. She could not imagine anyone mocking Hana's work. "I went home that day certain I would quit," Hana said. "I felt the same shame you feel, the same certainty that I was foolish for trying. But that night, I made a decision. I decided that my teacher's laugh was information about one moment, not a judgment about my worth or potential. He was right that the bowl was poorly made, but that did not mean I was incapable of learning to make better ones." She picked up the bowl and turned it in her hands. "I kept this bowl to remind myself that skill develops over time, that early failures are part of the path, not evidence that you should not be on the path at all. Your father's laugh 15 years ago was a moment, a thoughtless moment that probably meant nothing to him and that he has long forgotten. But you have taken that moment and let it grow into a constant companion. You have let it become the voice that judges all your work. "What should I do?" Yuki asked. Hana smiled. "You need to update your information. The wound from that laugh has been sitting in you for 15 years, based on the understanding of a 7-year-old child. That child interpreted the laugh as proof that she should be ashamed. But you are not that child anymore. You are a skilled adult potter with years of training. Perhaps it is time to look at the old wound with your current eyes, not your 7-year-old eyes." Over the following weeks, Hana gave Yuki a practice. Every time the feeling of shame arose, every time she heard that internal voice saying her work was foolish, Yuki would pause and ask herself a question. Is this true right now? Or is this an old wound speaking? She would look at her actual work with her actual adult eyes, not through the lens of a 15-year-old memory. At first, it was very difficult. The shame felt so real, so present. But gradually, Yuki began to distinguish between what was actually in front of her and what she was projecting from the past. She started to see that most of her pots were actually quite good, that the flaws she obsessed over were minor and part of the natural learning process, that no one was laughing at her except the ghost of that long-ago moment. The wound began to heal, not because Yuki decided the childhood laugh had not hurt her, but because she stopped letting it speak for her present reality. She acknowledged that yes, that moment had wounded her. Yes, it had created shame and fear, but that was then. This is now. Her father's thoughtless laugh 15 years ago did not get to determine her worth as a potter today. Months later, Yuki created a series of bowls that Hana entered into a regional craft exhibition. They won recognition for their beauty and skill. When Yuki saw her work displayed and admired, she felt something shift permanently. The old wound was finally closing. She could still remember the childhood laugh, but it no longer had power over her. It was just a memory of a difficult moment, not a truth about her capabilities. Years afterward, when Yuki had students of her own, she would tell them about the laugh that haunted her for so long. She would explain that old wounds often come from moments when we were younger, more vulnerable, less able to understand context or defend ourselves. Those wounds can persist far beyond their actual relevance because we never updated our understanding. We carry interpretations made by our younger selves and never question whether they are still accurate. Take another gentle breath and feel what these stories are offering you. Both Daichi and Yuki show us something important about how wounds persist. Daichi kept his wound open by constantly returning to the moment of trauma. Yuki kept hers open by letting a childhood interpretation continue to speak with authority in her adult life. In both cases, healing became possible when they changed their relationship to the wound. Not by pretending it never happened, but by stopping the behaviors that prevented natural healing. The Buddha taught that the mind has tremendous power to heal itself when we create the right conditions. Just as a cut on your skin will close if you keep it clean and do not keep picking at it, psychological and emotional wounds will heal if we stop the patterns that keep them open. This requires awareness. We need to notice when we are touching old wounds, when we are letting old interpretations speak as current truth, when we are choosing actions that prevent healing rather than support it. This noticing is not about judging ourselves harshly. It is about bringing gentle awareness to our patterns so we can choose differently. When Daichi realized he was deliberately replaying trauma, he did not condemn himself. He simply began choosing different memories. When Yuki saw that she was letting a 15-year-old wound speak to her present, she gently questioned whether it was still relevant. Both of them worked with their wounds with compassion, not force. Sometimes wounds persist, not because we are deliberately keeping them open, but because we never learned how to care for them properly in the first place. This brings us to another layer of understanding about healing. In a fishing village on the coast, there lived a man named Kenji who had been injured in a boat accident when he was young. The physical wound, a deep cut on his leg, had healed poorly because he had continued working without giving it proper rest. It closed eventually, but it left a thick, painful scar that bothered him for years. Kenji also carried an emotional wound from his youth. When he was barely 15, the girl he loved had rejected him publicly, mocking his confession of feelings in front of their friends. The humiliation had been intense. That emotional wound, like his leg injury, had never healed properly. He had simply tried to ignore it, to push forward and pretend it did not matter. But it had left a painful scar in his heart. He found himself unable to open up to anyone romantically. The fear of being mocked and rejected again was too strong. For 20 years, Kenji lived a solitary life. He was friendly with the other fishermen. He had acquaintances in the village, but he never allowed anyone close. He never risked vulnerability. The old wound had not healed. It had just been buried under layers of protection and avoidance. One day, a healer came to the village, a woman skilled in treating old injuries. Kenji went to her about his leg, which had been bothering him more as he aged. The healer, whose name was Chiyo, examined the scar carefully. "This did not heal well," she said. "You kept using the leg before it was ready. The tissue is tight and restricted, but we can work with it. With proper treatment and care, even old scars can soften and become less painful." Over the following weeks, Chiyo worked on Kenji's leg with massage, herbal poultices, and gentle stretching. The process was sometimes uncomfortable, but gradually the scar tissue began to soften. The chronic pain began to ease. Kenji was amazed that something that had bothered him for decades could actually improve. As they worked together, Chiyo noticed that Kenji seemed deeply lonely despite his friendly demeanor. One day she asked him about it. Kenji found himself telling her about the rejection he had experienced 20 years earlier, about how he had never recovered from it, about how he had closed himself off to protect against being hurt that way again. Chiyo listened with the same careful attention she gave to examining physical injuries. "That wound never healed properly either," she said when he finished. "You did with your heart what you did with your leg. You tried to just keep going without giving it the care it needed. So it closed badly, leaving scar tissue that restricts your movement and causes ongoing pain." Kenji nodded slowly. He could feel the truth of this. "With your leg," Chiyo continued, "healing required coming back to the old wound and giving it the attention it should have received at the time. We are softening the scar tissue, increasing circulation, helping the area become more flexible again. Your heart wound might need something similar, not reopening the wound to relive the pain, but giving it the care and attention it never received so that it can finally heal properly." "What would that look like?" Kenji asked. Chiyo thought for a moment. "When you were 15 and that girl rejected you? What did you need? What kind of care would have helped?" Kenji considered this. He had never thought about it before. "I needed someone to tell me that I was not foolish for having feelings, that her cruelty said something about her, not about my worth. I needed time to grieve the loss of what I had hoped for. I needed to understand that one person's rejection did not define my value or mean that everyone would treat me that way." "Exactly," Chiyo said. "But you did not give yourself any of that. You just buried the pain and tried to forget it. The wound closed over that unmet need, and the scar has been limiting you ever since." She leaned forward. "You cannot go back and change what happened, but you can give your past self what he needed. You can speak to that 15-year-old boy with the compassion and wisdom you have now. You can tell him the things he needed to hear. You can finally allow the grief and hurt to be acknowledged rather than buried. This is how old wounds that healed badly can be tended to so they heal better. Kenji felt something open in his chest. He had spent 20 years thinking the wound was just something he had to live with. That the limitation, the inability to be vulnerable, was just how he was now. But Chiyo was showing him that healing was still possible, that old wounds could be attended to with care even years later. Over the months that followed, Kenji worked on his emotional scar the way he had worked on his physical one. He spent time reflecting on that long-ago rejection with adult understanding rather than the shame and confusion of his 15-year-old self. He acknowledged the hurt that had never been properly grieved. He spoke kindly to his younger self, offering the compassion and perspective that had been missing. The process was tender and sometimes painful, like Chiyo's work on his leg. But gradually, the emotional scar tissue began to soften too. The rigid protection around his heart began to ease. A year later, Kenji found himself able to open up to people in ways he had not managed in decades. He developed a real friendship with another villager, someone he could be vulnerable with. The old wound was still part of his history, but it no longer controlled his present. The scar had finally healed properly, and though it remained as a mark of what he had experienced, it was no longer a source of constant pain or limitation. Take a slow breath here, and notice what Kenji's story reveals about healing. Sometimes, wounds do not heal well because we never gave them proper care at the time. We just tried to keep going, to push through to ignore the pain. The wound closed, but badly. The scar tissue formed thick and tight, creating ongoing problems. But the Buddha's teaching on healing shows us that it is never too late to attend to old wounds with proper care. Even injuries that happened years ago can be approached with the attention and compassion they needed at the time. This process allows them to heal more completely, to form softer scars that do not limit us as much. Many of us carry wounds like this. Things that happened when we were young, when we did not have the support or understanding we needed. We survived them. We kept going, but the wounds never healed properly, and now they create problems in our adult lives. We might struggle with trust because betrayal was never properly processed. We might have difficulty with vulnerability because rejection was never properly grieved. We might carry shame because our mistakes were never properly forgiven. The teaching here is one of hope. These old wounds can still heal better than they did. We can approach them now with adult wisdom and compassion. We can give our past selves what they needed at the time. This is not about changing what happened. It is about finally providing the care that supports proper healing. This brings us to an essential question about the healing process. How do we care for wounds properly? What does it mean to create conditions that support healing rather than prevent it? The Buddha taught specific practices for working with old hurts. These teachings are not complicated, but they require patience and gentleness. They work with our natural healing capacity rather than trying to force outcomes. Let us explore these practices through another story. In a temple dedicated to healing arts, there was a garden where injured or sick people would come to recover. The garden was tended by a monk named Satomi, who had devoted her life to understanding what supports healing. Satomi had noticed over her years of work that physical wounds heal according to certain principles. They need cleanliness. They need protection from further injury. They need proper circulation. They need time and rest. And they need to be checked regularly, but not picked at constantly. She began to see that emotional and psychological wounds follow similar principles. People would come to the healing garden carrying all kinds of old hurts. Some had experienced betrayal. Others had suffered losses. Many carried guilt or shame from their own actions. Satomi worked with each person to help their wounds heal properly. One day, a young woman named Amy came to the garden. She had been hurt by a friend who had spread cruel rumors about her. The rumors had cost Amy her position in a merchant house and had damaged her reputation throughout the region. Though the rumors had been proven false eventually, the wound remained. Amy was filled with rage toward her former friend and shame about what had happened. She could not move forward with her life because she was trapped in replaying the betrayal over and over. Satomi invited Amy to stay in the healing garden for as long as she needed. That first evening, they sat together and Satomi asked Amy to tell her about the wound. Not just the facts of what happened, but how it felt, what it meant to her, what she feared it said about herself and the world. Amy talked for a long time, and Satomi listened with complete attention. This was the first principle of healing. Acknowledgement. The wound needed to be seen clearly, spoken about honestly, witnessed by someone who would not judge or minimize it. Many wounds persist because they were never properly acknowledged. People told us to get over it, to move on, that it was not that bad. But wounds need to be seen and validated before they can heal. After Amy had spoken fully about her injury, Satomi did something unexpected. She took out a clean white cloth and asked Amy to hold it. "This cloth represents your wound," Satomi said. "It is real. It exists. We are not pretending it is not there." The cloth reminded Amy that her pain was real and recognized. This prevented the wound from being denied or minimized, which would have prevented proper healing. Over the following days, Satomi taught Amy the second principle of healing: protection. Just as a physical wound needs to be protected from dirt and further injury, an emotional wound needs to be protected too. This means not deliberately exposing yourself to things that will aggravate the hurt. For Amy, this meant not seeking out information about her former friend, not rehearsing the betrayal constantly, not putting herself in situations where she would be reminded of the rumors and the shame. But protection does not mean hiding away forever, Satomi explained. It means giving the wound time to close before testing whether it can handle exposure again. Like not putting weight on a broken leg too soon, but also knowing that eventually you will need to walk again. The third principle Satomi taught was circulation. Physical wounds heal better when blood flows to them, bringing nutrients and oxygen. Emotional wounds heal better when we bring attention and care to them regularly, but not obsessively. Each day, Satomi would ask Amy to check in with her wound. How does it feel today? Is it still as raw as yesterday, or is there some easing? This regular gentle attention allowed Amy to track her healing without picking at the wound constantly. The fourth principle was time and patience. Satomi explained that healing cannot be rushed. A cut takes days or weeks to close depending on its depth. An emotional wound might take months or years. This is not a failure. This is simply the nature of healing. Ayami wanted to be done with her pain immediately, but Satomi helped her understand that healing has its own timeline that cannot be forced. The fifth principle was perhaps the most important. Do not pick at the wound. Satomi noticed that Amy had a habit of deliberately returning her mind to the betrayal, replaying it in detail, imagining confrontations with her former friend, rehearsing speeches about the injustice. Each time she did this, she was picking at the wound, preventing it from closing. "Why do I keep doing this?" Amy asked in frustration. "I do not want to think about it constantly, but I cannot seem to stop." Satomi smiled gently. There are many reasons we pick at wounds. Sometimes we are checking to see if they still hurt, as if we need to confirm the injury is real. Sometimes we are trying to make sense of what happened by reviewing it over and over. Sometimes we are afraid that if we stop thinking about it, we are letting the person who hurt us off the hook. But picking at wounds keeps them open. They cannot close if we are constantly disturbing them. She taught Amy a practice. When she noticed herself starting to replay the betrayal to pick at the wound, she would gently redirect her attention. Not by force, but by choice. She would notice the impulse and say to herself, "I see you wanting to return to this wound. But right now, I choose to let it rest so it can heal." Then she would turn her attention to something present, something immediate, allowing the wound to be undisturbed for a time. Over the weeks Amy spent in the healing garden, she practiced all 5 principles. She had acknowledged her wound fully. She protected it from unnecessary aggravation. She checked on it regularly without obsessing. She gave it time without demanding instant healing. And she stopped picking at it by constantly replaying the betrayal. Gradually, genuinely, the wound began to close. The rage softened into something more like sadness, then into acceptance. The shame about what happened eased as she realized that her former friend's cruelty said nothing about her worth. The day came when Amy realized that she had gone a full day without thinking about the betrayal at all. The wound had closed enough that it no longer demanded constant attention. It was becoming a scar, a mark of something that had happened, but no longer an open bleeding injury. When Amy prepared to leave the healing garden, Satomi gave her final guidance. "The wound has healed significantly," Satomi said, "but scars can be tender. They can ache in certain weather. You may find that something reminds you of this betrayal, and the old pain flares up briefly. This does not mean you have lost your healing. It just means scars are sensitive. Be gentle with yourself if this happens. Acknowledge the momentary pain without panicking. Usually, it will pass quickly." Years later, Amy would tell others about her time in the healing garden. She would explain the 5 principles that Satomi taught her: acknowledgement, protection, circulation of attention, time, and not picking at the wound. She would say that these principles had allowed her to heal from something she thought would hurt forever. "The wound became a scar," she would say. "It is part of my story. I can see it there on my heart, but it no longer controls my life. It no longer bleeds or limits what I can do. I healed not by pretending nothing happened, but by giving the wound what it needed to close properly." Take another gentle breath and let these principles settle into your awareness. Acknowledgement, protection, circulation of attention, time, and not picking at the wound. These are practices we can apply to any old hurt we are carrying. They work with our natural healing capacity rather than against it. They honor both the reality of the injury and the possibility of recovery. The Buddha understood something profound about healing. He saw that we often interfere with our own recovery through impatience, through demanding instant results, through picking at wounds to make sure they still hurt. But when we step back and create the right conditions, healing happens naturally, not because we force it, but because healing is what living systems do when given the opportunity. Sometimes the wounds we carry are not from single dramatic events, but from repeated smaller injuries over time. These wounds can be especially difficult to heal because they are woven into the fabric of our daily experience. They become so familiar that we barely notice them anymore, but they shape everything we do. Let us explore this through another story. In a household in the city, there lived a woman named Mariko who had grown up with parents who were never satisfied with her accomplishments. No matter what she achieved, they would point out what she could have done better. When she brought home high marks from school, they would ask why she had not received perfect scores. When she excelled at music, they would suggest she should practice more. When she helped with household tasks, they would critique her methods. These were not acts of cruelty. Her parents believed they were helping her improve, pushing her to excellence. But for young Mariko, each critique was a small wound. Each time her efforts were met with commentary on their inadequacy, she internalized the message that she was never quite good enough. The individual wounds were small, but over years they accumulated into one large wound, a deep belief that no matter what she did, it would never be sufficient. By the time Mariko was an adult with her own household and work, this wound affected everything. She drove herself relentlessly, trying to reach a standard that would finally feel good enough, but no achievement satisfied her. She would complete a project successfully and immediately see only its flaws. She would receive praise and discount it, certain that people were just being polite. The wound of never being enough had become the lens through which she saw herself and everything she did. What made this wound especially difficult was that there was no single event to point to. No dramatic betrayal or loss, just thousands of small moments of having her efforts deemed insufficient. The wound was diffuse, woven through her entire sense of self. One day, Mariko collapsed from exhaustion. She had been working herself to the point of breakdown, driven by the relentless voice saying she needed to do more, be better, try harder. A physician who examined her said there was nothing physically wrong that rest would not cure. But he also said something else. You are suffering from a wound that will not heal because you keep reopening it. But I cannot treat this kind of injury. You need a different kind of help. He referred her to a wise woman named Fumiko, who worked with people suffering from what she called wounds of the spirit. When Mariko came to see Fumiko and explained her situation, the older woman nodded with understanding. You carry a wound made of many small cuts, Fumiko said. Each one alone might have healed easily, but they came so frequently, overlapping so much, that they merged into one large injury. Your parents cut you with critiques over and over until your sense of your own worth was carved away. Mariko felt tears come. Yes, that is exactly how it feels. This kind of wound is difficult, Fumiko said, because it did not come from one event. You cannot point to a moment and say, that is when I was hurt. The injury is everywhere and nowhere. It is part of how you learn to see yourself. Healing it requires patience, because you are not just healing a wound. You are learning to see yourself differently than you were taught to. Over many months, Fumiko worked with Mariko. The first step was helping her recognize the wound clearly. For so long, Mariko had thought the voice telling her she was never good enough was just reality, just accurate assessment. Fumiko helped her see that this was a wound speaking, not truth. The constant dissatisfaction was not a fair evaluation. It was an injury that had never healed. The second step was teaching Mariko to stop adding new cuts. She had internalized her parents' critical voice so completely that she now inflicted those wounds on herself. Every day, multiple times a day, she would look at her work, her appearance, her home, her relationships, and critique them harshly. She was continuing the pattern of injury without realizing it. Fumiko taught her to notice these moments. When the critical voice arose, instead of accepting it as truth, Mariko learned to recognize it. Ah, there is the wound speaking. There is the voice I learned from my parents. This awareness created a small space between Mariko and the criticism. She did not have to believe everything the voice said. The third step was the most challenging. Fumiko asked Mariko to begin speaking to herself the way a kind parent would speak to a beloved child. When she completed a task, instead of immediately critiquing it, she would practice acknowledgement. You worked hard on this. You did your best. This is good enough. At first, these words felt false, almost painful to speak. The wound resisted. The familiar voice of not enough felt more real than these new words of acceptance. But Fumiko encouraged her to persist. Even if you do not believe it yet, she said, practice saying it. You are teaching yourself a new way of speaking to yourself. It will feel strange at first because it is unfamiliar, but over time, with repetition, it will become more natural. Months passed. Mariko continued her practice of recognizing the critical voice as a wound rather than truth, and speaking to herself with kindness, even when it felt awkward. Slowly, genuinely, something began to shift. The wound that had been opened thousands of times over years began to close. The voice of never enough grew quieter. It did not disappear completely, but it lost its authority. One day, Mariko finished a project and felt something she had not experienced since childhood. Simple satisfaction. Not pride or accomplishment, just a quiet sense that what she had done was sufficient. The wound had healed enough that she could see her efforts clearly rather than through the lens of inadequacy. Years later, when Mariko had children of her own, she was careful about how she spoke to them about their efforts and achievements. She remembered the 1,000 small cuts that had created her wound. She was determined not to create the same injury in her children. She would acknowledge their efforts, celebrate their progress, and help them see their own worth independent of whether they met some arbitrary standard of perfection. When friends would ask her how she had recovered from her years of driving herself to exhaustion, she would explain about the wound made of many small cuts, about learning to recognize the critical voice as an injury rather than reality, about the patient practice of speaking differently to herself until the new voice became more real than the old one. Some wounds are built over time, she would say. They require time to heal too. You cannot heal years of injury in a single moment, but with persistent, gentle care, even these diffuse wounds can close. You can learn to see yourself with kindness instead of constant critique. The wound can become a sensitivity rather than a disability. Take a slow breath and notice what Mariko's story brings up for you. Many of us carry wounds like hers, not from single dramatic events, but from repeated smaller injuries that accumulated over time. Critical parents, bullying peers, harsh teachers, or simply growing up in circumstances that taught us we were not valuable unless we achieved certain things. These wounds can be especially hard to see because they are so woven into our identity. We think the voice telling us we are not enough is just reality. We think the constant self-criticism is just being honest about our limitations, but often it is a wound speaking. An injury that formed over time through repeated messages that we were inadequate. Healing these wounds requires recognizing them first, seeing that the harsh internal voice is not neutral truth, but an echo of old injuries. Then we can begin to speak differently to ourselves, not with false praise or denial of real limitations, but with the kind of basic kindness we would offer anyone we cared about. The Buddha taught extensively about right speech. We often think this teaching is about how we speak to others, but it applies equally to how we speak to ourselves. Harsh, critical, constantly dissatisfied internal speech creates and maintains wounds. Gentle, honest, supportive internal speech creates conditions for healing. This does not mean we never acknowledge mistakes or areas for growth. It means we do so without the overlay of shame and inadequacy. We can say, I made a mistake here and I want to learn from it, without adding, and this proves I am fundamentally flawed. We can recognize areas where we want to improve without believing that our current state makes us unworthy. Sometimes wounds persist because we are surrounded by conditions that keep reopening them. This brings us to another layer of understanding about healing. In a workshop where fabrics were dyed, there worked a man named Hiroshi who had a wound on his hand that would not heal. Every time it began to close, something would reopen it. The work he did with harsh chemicals and rough materials kept irritating the injury. He would bandage it carefully at night, but each day of work would damage it again. Hiroshi knew the wound needed to heal, but he also needed to work to support his family. He felt trapped. The physician he consulted was frank with him. This wound will never heal properly as long as you continue exposing it to the conditions that damage it. You need to either change your work or find a way to protect the injury while you work. Otherwise, you will have an open wound indefinitely. Hiroshi struggled with this advice. He could not simply stop working, but he also recognized the truth of what the physician said. After much thought, he made changes. He found ways to protect his hand while working, using thick gloves and being more careful about which tasks he took on. He also negotiated with his employer to shift some of his duties to work that did not aggravate the injury as much. These changes were not easy. They required creativity and some difficult conversations. But gradually, with the injury protected from constant re-injury, it began to heal properly. Hiroshi's physical wound teaches us something about emotional and psychological wounds too. Sometimes they will not heal because we are still in the conditions that created them. We might be trying to heal from a critical parent's wounds while still living with that parent and receiving daily criticism. We might be trying to recover from a toxic relationship while still maintaining contact with the person who hurt us. We might be working to heal shame about our appearance while constantly exposing ourselves to environments that reinforce that shame. The Buddha taught about right environment. He understood that our surroundings affect our ability to heal and grow. Sometimes healing requires changing our circumstances, not always dramatically, but in ways that reduce ongoing harm. This might mean setting boundaries with people who keep reopening wounds. It might mean limiting exposure to situations that trigger old injuries before they have healed sufficiently. It might mean seeking out environments and people that support our healing rather than undermine it. This teaching can be difficult because we often cannot change our circumstances completely. We have obligations, limited resources, and complicated relationships. But even small changes in environment can support healing. Even small protections can help. Let us explore this through one more story about environment and healing. In a household, there lived a young man named Takeshi who was trying to heal from a deep wound of rejection. He had been cast out of a professional guild for a mistake he made years ago. The rejection had been public and humiliating. He had worked hard to rebuild his life and his sense of worth, but the wound remained tender. The problem was that he lived in the same district where the guild was located. Every day he would walk past the guild hall. He would see former colleagues who would often look away or whisper to each other when they saw him. Each encounter was like pressing on a healing bruise. The wound never had a chance to fully close because he was constantly reminded of the rejection. Takeshi's friend Kenzo noticed how these encounters affected him. He saw how Takeshi would tense up when they walked through certain streets, how his mood would darken after seeing someone from the guild. One day, Kenzo asked Takeshi directly about it. "Why do you keep walking this route? There are other ways to get to the market that do not take you past the guild hall." Takeshi looked surprised. He had not really thought about it. "It is the most direct route," he said. "And besides, I should not have to change my path because of what happened." Kenzo nodded. "That is true. You should not have to. But the question is not what should be. The question is what supports your healing. Every time you walk past that guild hall, every time you encounter those people who rejected you, you are reopening the wound. Maybe the most direct route is not the most healing route right now." Takeshi felt resistance to this idea. It felt like letting the guild win, like letting the rejection control his life. But Kenzo helped him see it differently. Taking a different route is not about them controlling you. It is about you choosing what supports your healing. Once the wound has closed more fully, maybe walking past the guild hall will not affect you much. But right now, while you are still healing, why keep pressing on the bruise? Takeshi decided to try it. He began taking a longer route that avoided the guild district. At first, it felt like defeat, but within days, he noticed a difference. He was calmer. He spent less time replaying the rejection. His mood was more stable. The wound was finally getting a chance to close without being constantly disturbed. Months later, when the wound had healed more completely, Takeshi did walk past the guild hall again. He felt a twinge of the old hurt, but it was manageable, brief. The scar was still there, but it no longer controlled him. He realized that the temporary change in his route had given him the protection he needed during the most tender part of the healing process. When he would tell this story later, Takeshi would emphasize the difference between avoidance that keeps you stuck and protection that supports healing. Avoiding the guild hall forever would have been letting the wound control his life. But temporarily, taking a different route while the injury was most tender, that was wise protection. It gave the wound space to close so that eventually he could walk anywhere without being disabled by old pain. Take another breath and notice what these teachings are revealing about healing. Sometimes we need to change our environment or our exposure to certain triggers, not permanently, but temporarily while healing happens. This is not weakness. This is wisdom. It is understanding that wounds heal better when they are not constantly reopened by circumstances that aggravate them. The Buddha taught the middle way, not complete avoidance, which is a kind of prison, but also not forcing ourselves to endure conditions that prevent healing out of some idea that we should be tough enough to handle anything. The middle way honors both our need to heal and our eventual need to engage fully with life. It gives us permission to protect ourselves temporarily so we can ultimately become less vulnerable. As you rest here tonight, you might consider your own wounds and the environments you are in. Are there circumstances that keep reopening old injuries? Are there small changes you could make that would give your wounds more space to heal? This is not about hiding from life forever. It is about creating conditions during the healing process that support recovery rather than prevent it. We have explored many aspects of how old wounds heal. The importance of not picking at them, the need to attend to them with proper care. The way words spoken differently can change everything. The impact of environment on healing. Now we look at perhaps the deepest teaching about old wounds, the way they can transform us if we let them. The Buddha taught that suffering can be a teacher. Not that suffering is good or that we should seek it out, but that when pain comes, as it inevitably does, we can learn from it. We can let it deepen our compassion, our wisdom, our understanding of what it means to be human. Old wounds, when they heal properly, can leave us more capable of kindness, more patient with others' struggles, more aware of life's fragility and preciousness. Let us explore this through a final story about transformation through wounding and healing. In a remote mountain area, there lived a woodworker named Isamu who was known for the strength and confidence of his work. He had never experienced serious difficulty in his life. He had grown up in a stable family, learned his craft easily, built a successful business. He was strong, capable, and perhaps a bit arrogant about his resilience. One winter, a disease swept through the mountain communities. Isamu fell severely ill. For weeks, he hovered between life and death. The illness left him so weak that he could barely stand. His muscles had wasted. His hands shook. He could not work at all for months. For someone who had always been strong and self-sufficient, this was a profound wound. Not just to his body, but to his sense of who he was. As Isamu slowly recovered, he found himself changed in unexpected ways. The physical wound of the illness was healing, but it left him different. He noticed things he had never seen before. He saw the effort it took for elderly people to walk up hills. He understood the frustration of wanting to do simple tasks, but lacking the strength. He felt the vulnerability of depending on others for basic needs. Before his illness, Isamu had been impatient with people he saw as weak or inefficient. He had little sympathy for those who struggled with work he found easy. But now, having experienced his own weakness and limitation, his heart had softened. He found himself more patient, more understanding, more willing to help those who needed it. One day, a young apprentice in his workshop made a clumsy mistake that ruined a piece of wood. The old Isamu would have been harsh, perhaps even cruel in his criticism. But now, remembering his own time of weakness and limitation, he responded differently. "Mistakes happen," he said gently. "The wood can be replaced. Let us look at what went wrong so you can learn from it." The apprentice looked at him with surprise, having heard about Isamu's former harshness. Isamu smiled slightly. "I learned something from being ill," he said. "I learned that we are all more fragile than we think. That strength is temporary, and weakness can come to anyone. That judging others harshly for their limitations is foolish, because we all have limitations, even if they are not visible at the moment." Years later, people would say that Isamu's illness had changed him for the better. He was still skilled, still capable, but now he was also kind. The wound had healed, but it had transformed him in the process. He had let the injury teach him something essential about compassion and humility. When people would ask Isamu about this transformation, he would speak honestly about what the illness had given him. "It took something from me," he would say. "My unbroken strength, my certainty that I was invulnerable. But it also gave me something more valuable. It gave me the ability to understand others' suffering. It gave me patience and gentleness I did not have before. The wound became a teacher." This is what the Buddha meant when he taught that suffering can lead to awakening. Not that we should seek suffering or celebrate it when it comes, but that when wounds happen, as they inevitably will, we can choose what we learn from them. We can let them make us bitter and closed, or we can let them make us wiser and more compassionate. The choice is not always conscious. Often it unfolds naturally based on how we work with the wound during the healing process. Take a gentle breath and feel into this teaching. Your old wounds, the ones you have been carrying, are they making you harder or softer? Are they closing you off or opening you to deeper understanding? There is no judgment in this question, simply curiosity. Sometimes wounds make us protective and defended because we need that protection while healing happens. But eventually, if we let the healing complete, the same wounds that once made us close down can become sources of wisdom and compassion. Think of Isamu's transformation. His wound taught him humility and patience. It gave him the ability to see and respond to others' struggles with kindness. What might your wounds be trying to teach you? What understanding might emerge from them once they heal enough that you can look at them without being overwhelmed? The Buddha taught that wisdom often comes through difficulty. Easy lives can leave us shallow and unable to understand deeper truths. But lives that include wounding and healing, pain and recovery, loss and transformation, these lives develop depth. They develop the capacity for real compassion, not just the idea of it, but the felt sense of understanding others' pain because you have known your own. This does not mean we should be grateful for our wounds while they are still fresh and bleeding. That would be asking too much. But once healing has progressed, once the acute pain has eased, we might be able to look back and see what the wound taught us, how it changed us, what it opened in us that might not have opened any other way. Let us explore one more dimension of healing old wounds. The way that healed wounds can sometimes help others heal theirs. In a village, there lived an elderly woman named Natsuko, who had experienced terrible loss in her life. Her husband and 2 children had died in an epidemic years ago. The wound of that loss had been devastating. For a long time, Natsuko had barely functioned. She had gone through the motions of living but felt dead inside. Through years of patient grieving and gentle self-care, Natsuko's wound had finally healed. Not healed in the sense that the loss did not matter anymore. The scar remained. She still missed her family every day, but healed in the sense that she could function, feel joy again, engage with life. The wound had closed enough that it no longer disabled her. One day, a young woman in the village experienced a similar loss. Her child died suddenly from illness. The young woman, whose name was Emi, was drowning in grief. She felt that her life was over, that she would never recover from this wound. The other villagers tried to comfort her, but their words felt empty. They had not experienced what she was experiencing. They could not truly understand. Then Natsuko came to sit with Emi. She did not offer platitudes or advice. She simply said, "I know this wound. I carry a scar from the same injury. I am so sorry you are experiencing this pain." Emi looked at Natsuko and saw something in her eyes. Recognition, true understanding. Not just sympathy, but the knowledge that comes from having survived the same kind of devastation. "Tell me," Emi said through her tears, "does it ever stop hurting this much?" Natsuko was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said honestly. "Not completely. The loss will always be part of you. but the acute agony does ease. The wound does heal. You will be able to breathe again, to feel things besides pain. It takes time. It takes gentleness with yourself, but healing is possible. I am proof of that. Over the following months, Natsuko became Emi's guide through the grief process. She did not try to rush Emi's healing or tell her she should be over it by now. She simply walked beside her, sharing what had helped in her own healing, offering presence and understanding that only someone with the same scar could offer. Years later, Emi's wound had healed enough that she could function again. She would never forget her child. The scar would always be tender, but she was living again, engaging with the world. And when another person in the village experienced a similar loss, Emi found herself called to offer the same presence Natsuko had given her. The healed wound had become a source of connection and service. This is one of the profound gifts that comes from healing old wounds. We become capable of helping others heal similar injuries. Our scars become maps that can guide others through their own darkness. The pain we survived becomes wisdom we can share, not by preaching or advising, but simply by being proof that healing is possible, that wounds can close, that life can be engaged again even after devastating hurt. The Buddha taught about the Sangha, the community of practitioners who support each other on the path. Part of what makes community powerful is that we all carry different wounds at different stages of healing. Those whose wounds are fresh can be held by those whose wounds have healed more. And those who are healing now will someday hold others who are just beginning their healing journey. This web of mutual support and understanding is part of how healing happens. Take another slow breath and consider this dimension of your wounds. As they heal, as the scars form, you are developing the capacity to help others with similar injuries. Your pain is not wasted. Your struggle is not meaningless. It is building in you a depth of understanding and compassion that can serve both yourself and others. This does not make the pain good or justified, but it does mean that even our deepest hurts can eventually become sources of connection and wisdom. We have traveled through many teachings about healing old wounds tonight. We have seen how wounds persist when we keep them open by picking at them, by letting old interpretations speak as current truth, by staying in environments that constantly aggravate them. We have learned the 5 principles of healing: acknowledgement, protection, circulation of attention, time, and not picking at the wound. We have discovered that even wounds that healed poorly can be attended to with care years later and can heal better. We have explored how wounds made of many small cuts over time can finally close through patient practice of speaking differently to ourselves. We have seen that sometimes healing requires changing our environment or our exposure to triggers, not forever but temporarily, while the most tender healing happens. We have learned that wounds, when they heal properly, can transform us, teaching us compassion, humility, patience, and wisdom. And we have discovered that our healed wounds can become sources of service, allowing us to help others navigate similar pain. The Buddha's teaching on healing is ultimately one of hope. No matter how old the wound, no matter how deep the injury, healing is possible. Not healing that erases what happened or pretends we were never hurt, but healing that allows the wound to close, to form a scar, to become part of our history without controlling our present. Healing that leaves us changed but not broken, different but still whole, marked by experience but not disabled by it. As we move toward rest, let us explore one final teaching about healed wounds, the way they can reveal our strength. In a monastery, there was a teaching about broken bones. The master would tell students that when a bone breaks and heals properly, it becomes stronger at the breakpoint than it was before. The healed break is reinforced, more resilient, less likely to break in the same place again. The same can be true of emotional and psychological wounds. When they heal properly, when we give them the care and attention they need, when we allow the full healing process to unfold, we can emerge stronger than before. Not undamaged, but reinforced at our points of vulnerability. The places where we were wounded and healed become sources of strength. This is not automatic. If a bone heals poorly, if it is not set correctly or given proper care, the breakpoint can remain weak. The same is true of emotional wounds. They need proper care to heal in ways that make us stronger. But when we do give them that care, when we work with them wisely, something remarkable can happen. The wound that once felt like it would destroy us becomes evidence of our capacity to survive and recover. There was a monk named Daichi who shared a teaching with his students about this. He would show them his hands, which were marked with scars from years of work in the monastery gardens. Each scar has a story, he would say. This one from a thorn that went deep when I was careless while pruning roses. This one from a cut I got while splitting wood. This one from a burn when I was learning to tend the fire. He would hold up his scarred hands. When I was young, I wanted perfect, unblemished hands. I thought scars were ugly, evidence of mistakes and carelessness. But now I see them differently. Each scar is proof that I was wounded and I healed, that my body knew how to repair itself, that I survived the injury and continued on. These scars are not marks of weakness. They are marks of resilience. He would then speak more seriously. The scars on my hands are visible, but I also carry invisible scars. Wounds from loss, from mistakes I made that hurt others, from times I was betrayed or rejected. Those wounds healed too. The invisible scars are also proof of resilience, of the heart's capacity to mend, of my ability to be hurt and not be destroyed. The students would listen carefully as Daichi continued. When you are in the middle of being wounded, when the injury is fresh and the pain is acute, it does not feel like you will survive. It feels like this hurt will end you. But look at any scar on your body. That injury once felt overwhelming too. You survived it. You healed. Your body or heart or mind did what it needed to do to recover. Trust that this capacity is still there. Trust that wounds heal when given proper care. This teaching brings us to the heart of the Buddha's wisdom about old wounds. They are not permanent states. They are temporary conditions, moving through stages toward healing. Fresh wounds are acute and demand attention. Healing wounds are tender and need protection. Healed wounds become scars that are part of us, but no longer disable us. And scars, when we see them rightly, are evidence of our strength, proof of our capacity to be hurt and recover, markers of a life fully lived, rather than carefully protected from all difficulty. As you rest here, tonight, you might bring gentle awareness to your own wounds, old and new. Which ones are still fresh, still bleeding, still demanding immediate care? Which ones are healing but tender, needing protection and patience? Which ones have become scars, part of your history, but no longer a source of constant pain? There is no judgment about where any wound is in the process. Healing has its own timeline. Some wounds close quickly. Others take years. This is simply how it is. What matters is not how fast you heal, but that you are giving your wounds what they need. Acknowledgement rather than denial. Protection rather than constant exposure. Gentle attention rather than obsessive picking. Time rather than impatience. And trust in your own capacity to heal, in the natural wisdom of your heart and mind and body, to move toward wholeness when given the opportunity. The Buddha taught that we all have Buddha nature, the fundamental capacity for awakening and healing that exists in every being. This nature is never damaged by our wounds. It remains whole and intact, always working toward recovery, always moving toward balance. Our job is not to create healing through force of will. Our job is to create conditions that allow the natural healing process to unfold, to remove obstacles rather than add them, to support rather than interfere. This is why the teachings tonight have emphasized gentleness, patience, and wisdom rather than techniques or methods to force healing. The healing is already happening. It is always happening. Our wounds want to close. Our hearts want to mend. This is the natural direction of life. But we can interrupt this process through impatience, through harsh self-judgment, through picking at wounds, through staying in conditions that keep reopening injuries. When we understand this, we can step back and let healing happen. As we prepare to fully rest, there is one more teaching to receive. The Buddha spoke often about impermanence. Nothing stays the same. Everything changes. This includes our wounds. The pain you feel tonight will not be exactly the same tomorrow. The wound that feels overwhelming now will shift, will change, will move through stages of healing whether you do anything or not. Time itself is a healer when we do not interfere with its work. This teaching of impermanence can bring great comfort when we are hurting. The pain is not permanent. The wound is not a fixed state. Everything is moving, changing, shifting. The you of tomorrow will not be exactly the you of today. Healing is happening in each moment, cells regenerating, neural pathways adjusting, the heart learning to beat around the tender places. You are never static. You are always in process. And the process, when left to its natural course, moves toward healing and balance. So tonight, as you let yourself settle into sleep, know that healing is happening even now, even as you rest, even as you dream. Your wisdom is working to integrate what you have learned. Your heart is working to mend what has been torn. Your body is working to release what it has been holding. You do not need to make any of this happen. You just need to allow it, to trust it, to give it space. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Let your body settle completely into whatever supports it. Let your mind drift where it needs to go. The teachings will continue working in you even as you sleep. The stories will settle into your awareness. The wisdom will integrate naturally. You have done enough for tonight. You have been present for these teachings. You have allowed yourself to consider your wounds with honesty and compassion. This is sufficient. Know that the wounds you carry are not permanent. They are conditions in the process of healing. Some will take time, some will leave scars, but none of them can ultimately prevent your fundamental wholeness. That wholeness is always there, always intact, waiting patiently for the wounds to close so it can be felt and known again. The Buddha taught that peace is our natural state, not the absence of difficulty or pain, but the deep underlying peace that remains even when surface waters are troubled. Your wounds are like waves on the surface. They are real. They affect you. But beneath them is a depth that was never wounded, that cannot be damaged, that remains whole and still and peaceful, always. As you drift towards sleep, let yourself sink down beneath the waves of worry, beneath the surface disturbance of old pain, down to that deep still place that has always been there. Rest there. Let the wounds on the surface heal in their own time. Down here in the depths, you are already whole. You have always been whole. The wounds are temporary visitors passing through. The wholeness is what you are. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for your courage in looking at old wounds with honesty. Thank you for your willingness to consider new ways of relating to your pain. Thank you for trusting these ancient teachings to offer you something valuable. May your wounds heal cleanly and completely. May your scars become sources of wisdom and strength. May you know yourself as fundamentally whole, even as you carry the marks of a life fully lived. Sleep well, rest deeply, and know that healing continues even in your sleep. The Buddha's teachings are working in you now, creating conditions for old wounds to finally close, for tender places to grow strong, for pain to transform into wisdom. You are healing. You are whole. You are held in the great web of life that wants nothing more than your recovery and peace. Sleep well, dear friend, and thank you for joining us here at Calm Buddha Path.